Our last section we're going to go over is evolution. We are going to be doing 2 lecture sessions this week, and then your final project will be due over evolution on the 8th. So we're going to start out evolution, the definition, the scientific definition as we're talking about it in biological sense is evolution is the process by which modern organisms have descended from an ancient organism. A lot of times that when I ask people what they think about evolution, that we are related to monkeys, which all this is saying is that we have a common ancestor. We all branch off differently, so it's not that we have the closest ancestor to possibly apes, but it does not mean that we are ever related or anything like that to them. It just means that the closest ancestor, as the tree is branching off, that is believed. Now, when we talk about evolution, the goal here is just to inform you about it, and you guys can make any opinions you would like from there, but my job in this case is just to tell you about the theory of evolution and how Darwin came up with it, and then, like I said, you can make opinions from there. Now, we talked about in the first chapter the difference between a fact and a theory. This is considered a theory, scientific theory. Like we said, it's well supported, and it is a testable explanation, and it's about the phenomena that has occurred in the natural world. Now, in essence, evolution just means change over time, and it is a fact that organisms change over time, but the actual theory of natural selection, which we also call evolution, that's where we get into the theory, because this is going to be the theory of how it all happened and how it all took place. So we're going to start with Darwin. He is one of the main scientists that began the theory of evolution. He started in 1831. He set sail from England, and you can see on the red arrows the voyage that he took. And the circle there is the Galapagos Islands. You can see it's off of the but it's off to the left of South America. There are 3 small islands there. And we'll get to that, of why the Galapagos Islands were important on his travels. So when he was traveling, he was able to make numerous observations and was able to collect evidence that led him to propose the hypothesis about how life changes. We know that life is, from Darwin's, him and other scientists, it is now believed that the Earth is about 4.6 billion years old. And from this, that the Earth has changed drastically over time. Now, his theory is also called the theory of natural selection, but also is used hand in hand with the theory of evolution. The reason we use natural selection also is saying that nature is the reason that things change over time, is because they want to be the best suited for their environment, and we will continue talking about that. Alright, so let's talk about his observations he made. When he was looking at different animals, he noticed, and plants, they were very well suited for their environment they inhabited. So talking about, just an example of that would be if he was on a very dry, hot climate, you see plants such as a cactus. They don't have leaves, so they don't lose a lot of water. They're waxy, so they don't use a lot of water. And so they're very adapted to that environment of the desert. He was also impressed by the ways in which organisms were able to survive and produce those offspring in that environment. Producing offspring is very important when we talk about evolution, because if you can't reproduce, then you're actually not well suited for that environment. And then he was also puzzled and confused why there are different species that live in some places but not others. So, like, why do we not have giant tortoises that live in the Kansas area and things like that? So that's kind of some questions that he had for himself as he was making this voyage. Other things that he did was he collected fossils. One important thing that he found about fossils is some of the fossils, they resembled organisms that were still alive. But then, especially some of the older ones, they were completely unlike any creature he had ever seen. which kind of led him to start to think that the environment and our climate has changed significantly over time. All right, now which leads us to the Galapagos Islands. Like I said, it's off to the left of South America. The reason that they were important is because they were very close together, but they did have very different climates. So you could have one of the islands with a very dry, hot climate, not a lot of vegetation, more like the desert. Or they could have a lot of flowering plants. One of the other islands got more rainfall. So this would lead to different plants and different food sources. Now, Darwin observed that the characteristics of the many plants and animals varied noticeably among the different islands. So if the climate was changing, it made that the characteristics of the animals also changed. So as he was looking at this, he wondered if the animals living on the different islands had once been members of the same species. So I don't know if you guys have ever talked about in any of your other science classes about Pangea. If you haven't, it was the theory of the supercontinent, that all the continents were combined, and at some point in time they began to move apart. So the idea here is that at some point in time the Galapagos Islands could have been a part of Ecuador, or the South American country, and they could have all came from there. And then as the Galapagos Islands spread apart, all of those ancestors were there, but the climate changed as it went, as time went on. Now, what this caused, that Darwin believes that it caused for the animals to begin to change their characteristics to make them best suited for that environment. An example are, and they kind of call them Darwin's finches. So Darwin began to collect these birds, and when he began to collect them, he noticed that they were very similar but yet different. And as he continued collecting them, he realized they were all finches, but they had very different beaks. The reason that they had very different beaks is he believed that it was the climate and the food that the bird was hunting. Okay, so if it started out right in the middle, you see the beak. It was kind of sturdy, the thicker, but it was also pointy. Now, the different beaks that were developed, they all had a different reason because of what they were hunting on that climate. Okay, the one up top to the right, that would indicate that was hunting maybe possibly in a drier climate, because they were the seeds on drier climates are very tough and hard to break, but a bigger, larger beak would help that. Okay, some of the longer, skinnier beaks could say that they were in possibly dry or more wet conditions with more flowering plants. They could use them to get the insects, and also help to use them get into the flowering plants to get the nectar, and that's why they were longer. So the idea here was that Darwin was able to observe many different types of finches. They were all the same species, but they were changing because of the environment that they lived in. And that would help them to survive and reproduce and live longer.